Sometimes the solutions to SHTF events are actually worse than the SHTF events themselves. Right now we're experiencing multiple different SHTF style scenarios on different fronts, and different solutions are being proposed for each of them. Are those solutions actually better than what we're experiencing right now, or could they make things worse? We're going to talk about what to watch out for after SHTF in this video, so stick around and we'll go ahead and talk about the different events that we're currently experiencing and the solutions that are being proposed for them that might not actually make things better. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're going to talk about how after SHTF, sometimes the solutions for fixing those SHTF problems that we're experiencing could make things worse or become worse in the future than what we're already dealing with right now. There's a lot of uncertainty coming up here that we're all kind of wondering what they're going to do to respond to everything that's happening and what they're going to do to try to fix the problems that we're experiencing. And sometimes the fixes are worse than the problems themselves. So these are things we need to watch out for with a prepared mindset. How do you keep looking into the future, look into that crystal ball and figure out how to keep preparing for what's to come? And these are some of those exercises we need to do in order to stay ahead of the curve. So today we're going to talk about 3 of the different events that we're currently experiencing and some of the proposed solutions for those events and whether or not they're going to be better or possibly make things worse, okay? So really quickly though, if you want to stay ahead of the SHTF curve, if you want to make sure you're preparing for what's to come, hit the subscribe button below so that way we can keep talking about it and keep interacting down in the comments to try to learn as much as we can from each other and try to keep the message going for being prepared and looking out for what's to come. Okay, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of turmoil in our world right now, and it's very important that we all come together as a community and try our best to figure out what is the best way to move forward, okay? So, some of these orders coming down from the top on what the solution should be for all the current situations we're dealing with aren't necessarily always in our best interest. And especially for those of us who are more worried about just staying free people and being able to make our own decisions when it comes to our survival and when it comes to our way of life, we don't want to necessarily be told exactly what to do or how to live our lives from the top because we all know those people aren't necessarily qualified to tell us what to do. So, here's some of the things that I'm seeing and I'm also seeing being proposed in regards to the SHTF events we're all currently experiencing and things that I think we should all watch out for after these SHTF events are either over or after the initial impact of them occurs and whatever the solutions are for those SHTF events might be. So the first one I'm going to talk about is obviously related to the current unrest we're seeing in America, the civil unrest and what that could mean for our future. Obviously, this is one of the big SHTF indicators for things that are to come. Whenever things start to go bad, unrest is almost a certainty. And right now it is a lot more of a certainty than it ever has been before. It is nationwide, people are upset, and these protests and these riots and everything else going along with them have lasted longer than what we have seen in the past. So this is definitely something to keep an eye on. And regardless of how you feel about the reason behind these protests or anything along those lines, what we're talking about today is the solutions that are being proposed for these protests and for these riots and for everything else related around them and how that could affect us in the future and whether or not it's actually better than dealing with the problems we currently have. So what I mean by that is there's a couple different lines of thinking, and you have basically 2 different extremes for how to handle the situation at hand. One of those lines of thinking is going to be more of your government control style from the top way of thinking, and that's going to be enacting a form of martial law. I mean, right now a lot of cities are under de facto martial law already when they have National Guard troops move in and they have curfews and they're limiting the flow of traffic. That is already a de facto version of martial law. But some people are being proponents for martial law because they want control. They want these people to go home. They want them to stop doing what they're doing, and they feel that martial law might be the only way to achieve that goal. Well, here's the thing. Be careful what you wish for, because I don't know about you, but as a prepper and someone of a prepared mindset, I don't necessarily want the military to be able to tell me what to do either, okay? I don't want my freedoms and my rights to be stripped because of somebody deciding that martial law was necessary when maybe it wasn't. And that is something we have to be careful of. Wishing for something that can definitely put more of a strain on our ability to operate freely is an issue. So martial law might not be the answer. I mean, it might happen anyway, whether or not we like it, but if it happens, you need to be aware of what that could mean for you, what that could mean for your ability to operate as you do right now, okay? So, that being said, then there's the other extreme in the reactionary version of what's happening right now, and that's going to be just to abolish law enforcement in general. There's a lot of people actually calling for this, that have this idea in their head that having basically trauma counselors and people that can go and help victims get through crimes and help support people who commit crimes, either from a universal basic income or maybe to give them housing or things that, you know, they need right now that they might not have, which might drive them to commit crime, is what their thoughts are. And then why do we need police? Why do we need law enforcement? Let's just abolish it completely, okay? Well, obviously there's some huge implications for that line of thinking as well. If you honestly think that the general population is going to police themselves and take care of each other and be charitable and not covet what other people have and not go to extremes to get what they want regardless of whether or not they've earned it, then you are definitely kind of on the wrong line of thinking, in my opinion, because if anything has told us anything throughout history, it's that crime is an element of society. It's just part of the deal. It's not going to just magically go away because we get rid of law enforcement. Sure, are there things we can look at when it comes to the way that law enforcement acts in regards to different scenarios that they're having to deal with, and maybe some of the training or maybe some of their standards and guidelines could be looked at as being possibly changed to help some of the situations that we're dealing with right now? Of course, of course. I don't want to live in a police state any more than you do, just for the same reason I don't want martial law. However, the idea that you don't need law enforcement at all is dangerous. And if we can tell anything right now, and if you guys can understand what's been happening just from watching with your own eyes, without law enforcement around, things get out of hand. And that's exactly what we've seen during these protests and these riots and everything else going on regarding the unrest that we're seeing. Because when the police aren't there and there's no presence, things start to burn, things start to get stolen, things get broken. There was no police presence during that SHTF event. They were standing down. They weren't in the area. They weren't even able to get there if they wanted to, and it was a dangerous situation for them just as much as everyone else involved with those situations going on. So, that being said, the idea of abolishing police in reaction to what's going on right now is also a bad idea. I don't want to live under a police state. I don't need a boot on any part of my body, okay? But what I do need is some form of law and order in order to maintain the peace, and that's the whole idea of what law enforcement is for. And if you really don't think you need police, maybe you've never needed them before, and then congratulations to you, because that means you've had a great life. But if you've ever needed the police, you definitely were glad they were there. I can tell you that much. And of course, have you had interactions with police that you didn't want to have? I'm sure you have. But still, the idea of just getting rid of law enforcement in general is a dangerous idea. So we can look at where we're at right now when it comes to civil unrest and unrest in America. And then let's say we just abolish the police. Is that actually better than what we're dealing with right now? Or let's say we enact martial law. Is that better than what we're dealing with right now? Those are solutions that are being proposed that you need to think about and consider as being an actual possibility here in the near future, okay? So, let's move on, because there's a lot of other events going on in the world too. Obviously, the pandemic is another big event that is still ongoing. Whether or not the media decides to cover it anymore, whether or not people decide to believe in it anymore, doesn't mean that it's not currently an issue, and doesn't mean that people aren't proposing solutions regarding this pandemic that could affect us after the fact, okay? So, here's what I'm going to say about it. First off, last Wednesday, I want to say I noticed something that maybe not everyone here has noticed yet, but last Wednesday, I went on, started looking at different mainstream media news lines because I forced myself to do that in order to try to kind of digest every bit of information I can when it comes into regards of what's going on in the world today. And of course, I understand that most of it is skewed in a certain way, but I still use the mainstream media news as a secondary source of information to try to see where everything lines up and what's happening. Well, I noticed Wednesday that all the major players in the mainstream media news game didn't have coronavirus counters on their front page anymore. Suddenly, counting what's going on with infection rates or fatalities no longer matters to the mainstream media because there's so much other stuff happening. And this is something you need to keep in mind, and I want you to be aware of, because the fact that they just decided one day to remove those counters, even though that they technically keep going up, should show you that the media has played a huge part as the narrative surrounding this entire thing has changed over and over and over again, okay? So keep that in mind, because suddenly it's not as important anymore to them, and the things that are going on right now that we're all witnessing is much more important than a global pandemic, according to the media anyway. So, that being said, the different solutions that are being put forth for the pandemic, for the ideas of how to fix it and how to at least maintain it moving into the future, are also dangerous as well, and things that we have to prepare for, with the idea of like, these might actually happen. We're not necessarily going to like them, okay? So obviously the biggest, easiest thing to discuss when it comes to that is going to be some kind of a forced immunization situation, where you have to have immunizations up to date when it comes to the pandemic that's currently happening, and if you don't, then maybe it limits your travel or your ability to do other things in your professional life. I don't know, but that's definitely a solution that's being proposed. Whether or not you think it should be, or whether or not you don't think it should be, it's still being proposed, okay? So without saying too much about that, because we already know that's the deal, the next thing is crowd control. That's what I'll call it anyway. They're going to try to keep us in this mentality of trying to be separated, okay? Divide and conquer, it's a great strategy, right? So if they can keep people that are like-minded, of a prepared mindset, of a independent mindset, away from the idea of needing government control of your life, from congregating and getting together and deciding that they don't want to do this or that, or that they want to vote a certain way on these bills or these policies, or they want to come together and train as a militia or whatever else it might be, they're going to try to restrict that as much as they can as a solution to this issue. They're going to say that, you know, let's take out seats at movie theaters. Let's remove the ability to sit at certain areas of a restaurant. Let's go ahead and make sure that churches can only have such a large congregation. Let's go ahead and make sure public transportation can only have so many people. Airplanes can have only so many flights. It could go on and on and on. And that whole situation is something to be worried about, because freedom of assembly has been very important in this country since the beginning of the country. And without it, who knows if our forefathers would have been able to organize the revolution that got us to the point that we're at right now. Very important to keep in mind that these are solutions that are coming down the pipe. I'm not saying they're going to happen, but they are being proposed, and we should be preparing properly with the idea in mind that these might happen, okay? All right, so the last thing I'm going to talk about, because it's very important, and it's also on the horizon, and I think if you are paying attention to our current scenario and what's going on in the world, we all know the economy has a good chance of collapsing at this point. The economy cannot withstand what's happening right now. The amount of unemployment, the amount of businesses that are being affected by multiple SHTF events all at once, the amount of people who are out of work or unwilling to go back to work, the people that are quitting their jobs because of what's happening in the world right now. This is not something that we just let happen and nothing bad comes of it. This is a sign and an indicator of something bigger when it comes to our economy, and the economic collapse is definitely on the horizon. We've seen it start already. When the pandemic started, the economy reacted to it, and the stock market started to crash, oil prices plummeted to negative territory, things started happening economically that we didn't even know were possible. And yeah, are they being placated and band-aided over right now? Of course, you know, that's the best way to keep things moving. But economic collapse is on its way, because things take time to catch up, and eventually the inflation, because of the lack of production and the lack of labor going on right now, will catch up to our normal everyday life and then surpass it, and then we'll be in a bad situation. And this is just the orders of business. I know I say that sometimes in the videos, but it's just true. This is what happens, okay? So economic collapse, it's on its way. It's already started. If you're unemployed because of everything that's been going on lately, you're already in your own personal economic collapse. So I understand that some people don't feel like there is one because maybe they're not financially affected yet, but some people are, and some people are going to experience these things faster than we are, maybe, if you're in a good spot compared to somebody else. So what are the proposed solutions to an economic collapse of this nature? We've already seen some of them, but they weren't labeled the way that maybe some people would label them. So think of it this way. We had the stimulus checks come out because people needed money. We had additional unemployment attached to your checks because people needed the extra money to keep getting by, okay? So we are establishing a concept that This extra money is necessary for these people to survive. At a certain point, a universal basic income is going to be introduced to save the country from this economic collapse, right? Who else can save us but the government? Isn't that a great line of thinking? Well, a universal basic income is going to be easy to sell now that enough people actually need it or already rely on it based on the stimulus checks and the unemployment checks that are going out. And look, I want to make this very clear. If you are affected by the pandemic, if you're affected by the unrest and suddenly you don't have a job and you need this money to survive and keep your family afloat, I'm not upset at you for taking it. That's not what I'm trying to say here. I think that we've all paid enough taxes over the course of our lives that, of course, if you need unemployment to help you out and get through a tough time, go ahead and take it. I'm not trying to say anything negative about the action of doing it, but I am saying that this solution is going to snowball into a bigger and bigger social style program because they're going to say that it's working, that people are relying on it, and that people need it, and we should just keep it going for the rest of time because clearly it's something that's going to help our economy stay afloat instead of it fully crashing if we don't help support these people. So universal basic income could come out of this whole thing. And of course, is there some negatives related to that? Of course, okay? You can't afford one without more taxation. You can't afford universal basic income without taking money from somewhere else because right now we're already in a deficit. So if we're paying out more money when we're already negative, where does it come from? Those are questions that you have to answer. I'm not here to explain the way our government works and the way our Federal Reserve works, but I am here to tell you that UBI, universal basic income, is one of the solutions proposed, and is it better or worse than our current scenario? There's one more thing. One more solution for economic collapse that should be on all of our minds. That should be on your mind. It's definitely on my mind. And it's something that we all have to worry about. Last time there was a Great Depression. What really got us out of it? I mean, let's be honest. Does anybody know? It was war, okay? So war is on the horizon anytime there's this kind of economic instability, okay? It is one of the ways that the powers that be get their money back, okay? It's one of the ways that a country can decide it needs to take another country's resources in order to save its own economy and its own people. And then what happens next? Obviously, it's war. So something to very, very closely pay attention to. War could be on the horizon any moment at this point. When the economy's crashing, when there's unrest, when there's a pandemic, and when it's on a global scale, things start to fall into place. And it's something we should all be prepared for and all be considering right now as a possibility. I'm gonna be honest with you. These are things that are coming down the pipe. And I'm not trying to say that every single one of these solutions is going to be enacted. I'm not trying to say that they're just gonna declare war on a whim because, the economy's failing, so we gotta do something. That's not what I'm trying to say, but these solutions are being proposed as possibilities. And if they're being proposed as possibilities, if you want to prepare and keep your mind ready for whatever's to come, you should also be preparing for those possibilities, because if they're being proposed, then we should just consider them actually as happening. That's how you prepare. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, right? So if these things are being proposed right now as possibilities of how to solve our situation, our SHTF scenario we're in right now, we should be preparing for them even if they never occur. Keep that in mind, okay? So these are the things I wanted to discuss. I wanted to talk with you about. And it was something I was throwing around in my brain last night when I was trying to go to bed. But it just seems like this has been a topic of the conversation ever since the pandemic started, right? We don't want the solution to be worse than the problem. You know what? At first I wasn't sure exactly what that phrase meant, I guess, but now I think we all know. And I think that we're actually at that precipice where this could really be the issue. This could be the case. The solution could be worse than the problem. And if that's the case, where do we go from there? So I want you guys to discuss everything I said down in the comments. I want you to let me know your thoughts. I want you to tell me your ideas about the other solutions they might have for the SHTF events we're currently experiencing. And I want you to tell me about other factors that I maybe left out or things I forgot to talk about. There's a lot of things we could talk about. Even the idea of using AI to help utilize some of the functions that they could use right now to help solve all these little problems, right? Between contact tracing and between all the other apps that have been put out when it comes to the unrest, and then using AI to facilitate a better way to get people through whatever's going on right now, including universal basic income. Those things could definitely happen. So let me know in the comments below. I want you guys to stay prepared, keep preparing, pay attention, and if you have anything else at all for me, let me know. And otherwise, that's going to be it for Magic Prep.